Hello everyone, welcome back to Mentoring Diaries. I am Tuba, and today's conversation is one that feels especially important in the world we're working in. What it takes really to build future-ready organizations. Because if you listen to most leadership conversation, you will hear a lot about strategy, innovation, and growth. But when you look closely at organizations that are actually able to adapt and sustain themselves over time, you begin to notice something else. It's not just about strategy. It's about people, culture, and leadership capability that comes together or sometimes don't. And what I have seen through mentoring is that many organizations don't struggle because they lack ambition or direction. They struggle because these elements are treated as separate priorities instead of something that needs to be deeply aligned. And that's where mentoring becomes incredibly valuable. Not by offering solutions, but by helping leaders step back and ask better questions about how the organization is really functioning beneath the surface. And I'm really glad Dr. Jojo is joining me for this conversation today. So, Jojo, it's so wonderful to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your mentoring journey, especially your work with senior leaders and organizational transformation.
Dr. Tuba, thank you so much for having me here today. I really am delighted. So, yes, my name is Jojo, and I grew up in Ireland. And I guess my mentoring journey really started from when I was a child. I grew up with a great level of independence, some of which was self-driven and some of which I had no choice in. So I didn't really have this blueprint for how the world worked. And I guess what I had, instead were unexpected mentors and teachers and guides and friends and a few, I would say, extraordinary humans that I feel very grateful to for helping me on my journey. So when people ask, why do you care so much about mentoring or evangelize it? I think it's actually because I'm here because of them. And I've spent about 22 years now working with Facebook in Silicon Valley, Accenture all around the world, Majid Al Futtaim in the GCC to craft growth organizations, coaching C-suite, but really obsessing over why some people grow and why some people stagnate in the same environment. And I think it's because I want to give others the impact that mentoring gave me. I'm now a professor of leadership. I teach at Harvard Business Impact and Holt Business School. I work with the World Economic Forum. And I think really I just want to make workplaces happier and fairer. And I think if I reflect on all of that, I don't think I've ever met a great leader in one of my coaching conversations or one of my mentoring conversations who has ever got there alone. So that's why I feel very passionate about this.
That's a lovely and beautiful journey about you, and trust me, I mean, it talks a lot about the kind of experience I'm sure that you'll be talking about today from Facebook to Marshall for Temp, dealing with C-suites executive. So I'm sure we'll see a lot of it in our conversation today, Joe. So, Jojo, when we talk about future-ready organizations, it's a phrase we often hear, but I feel it can mean very different to different people. So from your perspective, what do leaders most often misunderstand about what it actually takes to be a future ready?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And the way you asked it about how people misunderstand it is just perfect. I think leaders hear future ready and they reach for the tech stack and they buy the platform and they launch the AI pilot and they rebrand the innovation team. But I think future readiness is not a tech acquisition problem. It's a culture challenge or opportunity. And you can't bolt agility and future readiness onto a brittle patchwork culture. It almost like the culture will reject it like an incongruent transplant. And the most kind of future ready people I have met or organizations are not the ones with the best tools, but they're probably the ones where psychological safety and compassion and growth is high enough that people will tell the truth and be able to perform under pressure. And I think whilst some companies think about future readiness as systems and they invest in that, they're really majoring in the minors, meaning they're starving the humans, that operating system, but behind it. And I think one of the best examples I know of this is Microsoft. If you think about Microsoft, you could almost forgive them for going tech first because they're a tech company. But when Satya Nadella came in, the technology investments really came second. He replaced the know-it-all culture with the learn-it-all culture, which was a mindset and a mentoring shift, not a product launch. And I think he moved market cap from 300 billion to over 3 trillion. So his future readiness strategy strategy was his business strategy, and it worked for him.
I think that is very important because, as you rightly mentioned, that a lot of time when we talk about future readiness, people feel it's the adaptation of AI. And they
Mm,
realize it's not AI adaptation, but what they're looking out for it is basically people, the culture transformation we're talking about today. That is very important,
yes.
because if you do not, believe in getting that particular adaptation, or something, that kind of a transformation that you're looking out for. I mean, how much ever AI you get, I mean, you need to have that human touch, the culture, because people are the most important part of your organization. And
Yes.
that brings us to an alignment that people, culture, and strategy are often discussed, but they're not always connected, because people feel that, okay,
Mm.
strategy is different, culture is different, people are different, tech is different. So, from a mentor's perspective, how should leaders begin aligning these elements rather than treating them as separate priorities?
Yeah. And it's the separation that is this problem, you know? Most organizations, they have their strategy deck and then their culture deck and then their people deck. And most of them were written in rooms by three different people that barely speak to each other or have never been in the same room. And I'd like to think a good mentor's role here is, maybe of connective tissue to sit across silos and to ask the uncomfortable integrating question that doesn't always win you friends, which was, do these three things point in the same direction? And the best mentors for me, and what I'm trying to do, is to hold up a mirror and to say, show me where your people strategy and, your culture strategy directly enable your business strategy. It tends to go sometimes quite quiet because alignment really does start with that shared language. And a people deck is not just HR's job, it's everyone's job in the organization. And strategy without people, without culture, it's just a slide deck. And there was a great theorist, Roger Martin, I think he wrote about integrative thinking, which we don't lean into enough, which said the best leaders, they don't choose between the three. They're not competing. They hold the tension and they honor it and they build a model that serves all three. It's a learnable skill. And I think it's a really unique selling point for mentors to help be, integrative and bring them together.
And I feel that integration is very critical, holding that pillar together. And when these elements are not aligned, organization you generally, may appear to move forward, but internally there's friction that you see amongst the people over there. So,
Yes.
and I believe mentoring often helps leaders see those disconnect more clearly in today's world. I would believe that. So let's talk about blind spots. Organizations
Mm.
are actively trying to prepare for the future work, but from your experience again, what are some of the biggest blind spot leaders may not be seeing?
Goodness, how long do we have? I
Feel
think,
free.
yeah, a lot of leaders, I think the first blind spot is we're preparing for a future of work that we can see, hybrid work, skills gap. The blind spot here is that the real future of work challenge are the unknowns, what we can't see, and how we're developing skills in people for work we don't know about. And then another blind spot tied to that is then people are developing the wrong people. They're investing in high potentials, whereas the middle layer, the critical organizational node, the culture carriers in your organization who execute strategy are being starved of development. Another blind spot is confusing activity with progress. You're running 47 training programs and you're calling it a learning culture. But a learning culture is not hours long. It's behavior change. It's achievement of strategy. I think another blind spot, which goodness, I hope that the community gets together to resolve soon, is well-being being treated as a benefit, not as a performance condition. And goodness, how long have we had all the research on cognitive load, on sleep optimization, on decision quality? And we're trying to build these future ready organizations on an exhausted workforce. And we're glorifying when people don't get sleep. And I think the final one, probably, which is relevant to today, is that I think there's a lot of underinvesting in mentoring and over indexing on coaching. And coaching is, when done well, it's transformational, but it's not always done well. And there's a lot of emerging research suggesting that in the moment, some leaders, when they're burned out, when they have to make a decision at pace, they don't need reflective questioning. They need, this is what I see, and this is what we need to do. And I think that power of mentoring, of I've been here and here's what I know, is really going to help people in the future of work.
I also believe, and in fact, I love the point where you shared, that just building in that in-house learning system is not going to support. There has to be
Mm,
a cultural change. And also, in my view, I believe that more than just a return on investment that people directly look forward for, it should be more about return on impact. Because when you start seeing that
yes.
impact, automatically you will see that ROI on your balance sheet too. But what I believe and I see is a lot of organization, they directly want to have that learning is equal to where is my ROI on my balance sheet, rather than
Yes,
not
exactly.
seeing that particular blind spot.
Mm,
That is it actually, are you able to create that impact? People often miss that
mm,
point. So I think that is
yes.
very important to look into that. And I also believe that sometimes the blind spots are not about what leaders do not know, but about what they assume is already working in the
Yeah.
organization. And
Mm,
another shift I find very interesting is moving from short-term performance to long-term capability building. So how do you think a mentor can
mm.
help leaders make that shift?
Yeah, I think, in big ways, because leaders today are often trapped in this system that I think rewards short-term performance thinking. It's your bonus, it's your review, it's your board metrics. I mean, a lot of these are quarterly, so you're rewarded almost for this myopia. And I think a good mentor doesn't pretend that that pressure doesn't exist. But it's to help a leader hold the tension that there's both time horizons, without having to collapse or over-index on one. And I think a good mentor, I mean, the good ones I've had, will reframe it as not just, what does success look like for you today, but what does it look like for you, for your team, for your enterprise in 5 years? And what are you doing today that directly contradicts that? And sometimes you'll see, almost people think, goodness. So I think that's an important question that helps align your short-term and long-term priorities. And I think mentors can help leaders see, which I think is so, so, so important, that developing people is your business strategy. It's not HR's role. It's not someone else over there. It's not the pastoral person or over-indexing on females in the workplace. It's not nice to have. The data on manager quality and developing people is overwhelming. We know now that your manager has more impact on your health than your doctor. And we know that like your manager and your leader accounts for 70% of the variance in team engagement. And I think a good mentor can help people realize that lifting others, growing others, developing others, it's not generosity. It's the most strategically smart, intelligent thing that a leader can do in the workplace.
Definitely. And I believe that, capability building, though it's slower, but far more sustainable rather than having those short-term performance,
Mm,
which is visible and measurable. And I think a
yeah.
role of a mentor over there is very important to help leaders stay committed to the longer view that
Yes.
we're looking out for. So culture is something we hear about all the time,
Yeah.
and but it's often not clearly defined or operationalized. So how can mentors help leaders turn culture into something that actually becomes a strategic advantage?
And it really can, because mentors, good mentors, help people understand that the culture is not the poster on the wall, it's not the values on the website. It's really the sum of every decision that the organization is making, even when no one is watching. Culture it's really what you tolerate, what you allow to happen, and that reveals anything more than any culture survey. Culture becomes real almost, I've heard people say, when it costs something. So the day you turn down a client because it conflicts with your values, or you promote the person who's telling the truth over the person who's hitting the number where people are just roadkill. And I think, culture it's just, there's no better description of it than what you tolerate. And if I think about a company that has really inspired me, which I try to take my guidance from it's Patagonia. Their culture is so consistent and it's operationalized, not in values on the website, like we said, but through every hiring decision, through every product decision, even through every marketing decision. You might remember they ran this campaign, which was like, don't buy this jacket. And it's the campaign where they tell people literally, don't buy one of our jackets unless you need it. It sounds counterintuitive, but they're saying, don't buy into fast fashion, don't buy into waste unless you really need to. And it said our commitment to sustainability goes beyond our profits. And it wasn't a marketing stunt, and yet revenue went up 30% that year. And you can almost feel that culture. And I think that is how you operationalize it from pre-hire to retire in every single step.
Very rightly said, Joe. Culture is not just about what organizations say. It's more about what they do consistently.
Mm,
And I think a mentor definitely helps
mm.
leaders in that way, to kind of really stay connect with the cultures, to behavior, decision, and everyday practices. So let's talk about leadership capability in building future-ready organization. Leadership, leadership cannot remain concentrated at the top, So what role does
Mm.
leadership capability play, and how can mentors help develop it at a scale?
Yeah. And sadly, given everything we know about organizational psychology, leadership capability is probably still the single biggest constraint in every transformation I've seen. Not tech, not budget, not market conditions, but leadership capability. It's still treated as an event, a one and done, but one size fits none. It's a program, it's an offsite, it's a 360. And I think mentoring, when done well, it's a sustained, it's trust-based relationship where capability is built in the context of work. So it's contextualized in real time over real stakes. And I think the way in which mentoring can be embedded into the organization to build this capability is that we stop thinking of it as a senior privilege, as something just the good people get, but see it as your infrastructure, as fundamental as performance management or learning systems. And maybe it's a culture a contract that people sign when they join an organization. I will mentor others, I will grow others, because the research on, near peer mentoring, it speaks for itself. It's really saying that the knowledge transfer, the capability transfer is overwhelming. And we've professionalized coaching to within an inch of its life. I mean, you can do thousands of coaching programs. And it's like we've almost forgotten that the most powerful development tool in the world is sometimes just a more experienced human that just cares about you and wants you to succeed. And I remember about 2 years ago now, I was lucky enough to visit Crotonville, which is, GE's big learning campus on the US East Coast. And their leadership pipeline, which is legendary now, I think it's produced more Fortune 500 CEOs than any other business school. And when I asked them, why do you think you've been so successful? They just said it was deliberate, structured exposure to mentors, people who walked the territory and they were willing to share what they had learned the hard way so others didn't have to. And I think that's why we know mentoring works.
I think sharing wisdom is also very important, and that's what we see as a part of
Mm,
mentoring. So that kind of helps people more rather than just giving them, talks on coaching and coaching them at certain levels.
mm,
That shift is very important that we all see it and talk about, and that also kind of
mm.
helps, leaders move from being more about decision makers to capability builders in the
Yes.
organization. So another
Yeah.
area leaders are navigating is workforce transformation. Skills are evolving, expectations are changing, and roles are becoming more fluid. So how should mentors support leaders through this complexity?
And it is complex. It really is. I think we forget now that transformation looks more like wildfire. And if we think about our previous generations, those of our parents and our ancestors, even just give the example of media, it took traditional media decades to scale. TV took something like 22 years to reach 50 million users. Facebook took like 4.5 years or something. ChatGPT did it in like 2 months. So transformation used to be slow adoption. It's now instant change. It's almost at the pace of yesterday. And the most important thing I think a mentor can do in transformation is almost to hold the leader's humanity steady, because transformation is, and few people want to say this, it can be genuinely frightening. It can expose people. And when you're frightened, you make bad decisions. And mentors have helped me when everything has just felt so overwhelming to say, what is the signal and what is the noise? In this intelligent area, we have this avalanche of information, of to-dos, of priorities. And my mentors have said, what are the 2 or 3 things that matter now that you have to move on, that are non-negotiable? And I think that mentors have not only done that, but that have reminded me that the price of admission and transformation are meaningful work and belonging and growth for my people. So whilst I'm feeling overwhelmed and making those decisions, these are really the price of admission. They're not soft demands. And it's really important that we're still making sure that our people feel the vulnerability is rewarded. They can show up as themselves and they can perform at their best without being penalized in these hugely complex environments.
Definitely. And, I would love to bring this to a real example. So, can you share a situation where aligning people's strategy with business strategy led to a meaningful transformation?
Yeah, there's actually a very recent example of this. I work with a company in the GCC in the luxury fashion space. And we face exactly this, what I would call misalignment, a brilliant business strategy, a fancy deck, and a lot of investment in it, but a people infrastructure that just had not kept space because, again, like we said, different people owning them in different rooms. And we did a root cause analysis and a diagnostic, which came out with kind of three findings, which were that we had leaders who were technically strong. Yes, they can code in Python, and yes, they can build a SAP MDM planning system, but they can't manage in complexity. We had a promotion culture that rewarded individual performance. So me, how do I get bigger and better, but not team development. And a learning architecture, like we also discussed, that was event-based, like, 35 hours this year, brilliant, rather than embedded in work. So we had to rebuild the leadership development architecture around the business strategy, not as a program, not as a one-off, but systemically. So things like development planning is now connected to succession. Succession is now connected to capability requirements. Capability requirements are connected to strategy. And there were some really hard metrics that shows when you integrate these two, it works. Internal promotion rate for senior roles increased by 40% with team development and measurable input. 360 leadership degree scores increasing so that people are happier and healthier in the workplace. And voluntary attrition in the manager level, which we know is one of the most under-awarded, under-invested in levels, fell significantly. And I think it was really the CEO who stood up there, who said that our people, capability development, our people strategy, it's a board level agenda item. It's not a HR initiative. Our people are not a cost. They're a capability. And a big example of this, and I've been lucky enough to sit in a room with him lecturing because he's moved from Best Buy now to Harvard, is Hubert Joly. And my French accent is terrible, but he really led Best Buy's turnaround until 2019, and revenue went up 7 billion in his time. And I remember he had this wonderful line that was so simple but so clear, which was, we treated our people as assets to be developed, not costs to be managed. And I think that's such an important line to remember.
Definitely, it is. I mean, and this example itself brings this to life that and shows how alignment isn't just conception, but it has real
Mm,
measurable impact in the organization.
yeah.
And finally,
Yes.
for leaders building organizations today, if there's one principle they should never compromise on when aiming to be future ready, what would it be?
Goodness, yeah. I think we have to think about uniquely human skills. What can we do that AI cannot take from us? And I think it's our humanity. And a big example of that is psychological safety. And really, it's just safety, full stop. And I think sometimes we think, psychological safety, it's the soft stuff around the edges. But I remember when Amy Edmondson, who I love that she started as an engineer because her big driver has always just been solving problems. And even when she started in Google, big piece of workplace analysis, she found out that psychological safety was the single biggest difference between high and low performing teams, above technical skill, above experience, above IQ. And I think in this era of complexity where we're overwhelmed with information, without caring for each other, without growing each other, you can't have honest feedback. You can't have risk taking. You can't have canned conversations that surface problems before they become crises. And, we've spoken a lot about future readiness, and really it's so tethered to psychological safety because that permits us to have learning agility, which I often think is learning faster than the pace of change, and the permission to reward vulnerability, for people to say, I got it wrong. I don't know. Here's an idea. It might be terrible, but stick with me. That all leads to creativity and business transformation, but it doesn't happen, without safety. And I think the most expensive thing in any organization, and goodness, you can ask Boeing, you can ask all of them, is the conversation that never happens. And I think psychological safety is the bedrock for that.
That's a powerful one, in fact, Joe, because in time
Mm,
of change, that we're seeing today, it's easy to prioritize speed over alignment. And most
mm,
of the organizations that we see today, are actually failing with alignment. And, as you mentioned, that it's very important to have all the three pillars aligned together.
yeah.
So this has
Mm,
definitely been such a thoughtful conversation, Joe. Let's move into a quick fireside round, whatever comes to your mind.
yeah. Okay.
One thing mentors must prioritize prioritize when guiding future-ready leaders?
I think honesty over hubris. I think if you just affirm, you're a very expensive mirror.
One mistake mentors see leaders make when preparing for the future.
I think it's movement over progress. Just because you're busy, it doesn't mean you're moving forward.
One question mentors should ask leaders more often about people and culture.
What are you tolerating that you shouldn't be and that your people are not telling you?
One leadership habit mentors often challenge or help unlearn.
Probably the habit of solving for rather than solving with and jumping to answers before we've actually asked our people. I think leaders who cannot sit in that question will never build teams that really think and stick.
One capability mentors should focus on building in future leaders.
I think the big one here is really emotional regulation, and not emotional intelligence or quotient, but the actual practice ability to notice that something's happening in your body and you're triggered, but being able to regulate it before it becomes visible and threatening to everybody else in the room.
One sign as a mentor that an organization is not future ready.
Probably when the most important conversations are happening in WhatsApp during the meeting or in the car park after the meeting, rather than in the meeting itself, I would say.
One mindset shift mentors must help leaders make for long-term success.
I think it would be a much happier, healthier working world if leaders move from what can I achieve and what is my legacy, to what can I enable and who can I grow. And the leaders who change organizations, I don't think they're the ones that are always online at 3 a.m. answering the emails, running. They are the ones who are creating the growth conditions to let others be people they don't even know they can be.
And one word that defines mentoring for future-ready organizations.
I think perhaps it is maybe, I think it's impactful generosity. But I mean the hard kind in that it's not the soft kind, it's the kind that costs something. It's sharing almost what you learned the hard way so that someone has an easier path.
Thank you, Jojo, for bringing in not just your experience, but your honesty into this space. It was a lovely conversation, and I'm sure, our audience is going to love it because it talks a lot about the transformation that is actually required in today's world rather than, just the one that looks, brilliant on the papers. Because as you mentioned, the conversation started with the people being future ready means being AI ready, so that's exactly where we want to see the transformation coming in, that it's not just AI ready, but you need to have that human touch, and that is very, very important. The building of people culture is also very important, not just technology in the company. So thank you so
I
much
so
for
agree.
your position.
Good.
If today's conversation gave you something to think about, take a moment with it. Change often starts quietly with a single insight. At IMC, we're committed to creating a better world through the power of mentoring. One conversation, one connection at a time. Until we meet again, take care of yourself and each other. Thank you.